Fallout Equestria the Chrysalis, Chapter 8, Part 2. The walk from Rust was much quicker in the dry midday warmth than it was in the pounding nighttime storm. The dry ground crunched faintly beneath our hooves, while the faint breeze teased at our manes. The sight of the torrential rain had entirely passed. We saw the land there for the first time. The only familiar part of the journey was the train tracks that we'd followed. Less than 2 hours after leaving Rust, we laid our eyes on a tiny ghost town. Again, it was the hint of the familiar, even if viewed from the opposite direction. Unfortunately, that familiarity brought it with a growing tension. I knew what lived in these ruins, and so did Dusty. "Starlight, how much punch does a Lancer have?" She cast a curious glance his way, then looked back into the distant shack that slowly drew closer.
"A lot. Tends to blow apart rocks when I shoot them, even fairly big ones. It'd probably put a hole right through Rust's gate."
"Good," Dusty said, then looked to me. "If this does go bad, our job is going to be keeping Sickle distracted long enough for Star to get a shot. Shoot her, yell at her, whatever. And Star?" He turned to her way. "You'll get one, maybe 2 shots before she'll kill us all, so make it count."
"You're not exactly inspiring confidence here,"
she replied. "I don't think it'll come to that," he said as he pulled a rifle from his back, leaving it to hang across his chest in easy reach. "I'd just like to be prepared." I did the same, and Dusty looked my way once again. "Don't expect that thing to do any more than piss her off, unless you get lucky and put a round right into a joint or something. Those bullets won't get through her armor. I doubt mine will either. Maybe if I had some AP rounds, but I don't."
"Noted,"
I said, stifling the tremble that threatened to seize my legs. The last 100 yards were crossed in silence, save for the jingle and creak of our equipment. After pausing for a moment to take a breath, Dusty stepped onto the porch and gave 3 firm knocks. A moment later, there was a loud thump from within the shack, accompanied by the muffled sound of a large number of bottles knocking together. Then a deep voice called out from the inside.
"Who the fuck's making all that noise?"
"It's Dusty." There was a couple more thumps, followed by a much louder one that knocked dust from the wall beside the door. A narrow broad halfway up the wall pulled back. In the darkness, I could only catch a hint of movement before it slammed shut. Then, the door swung open. That's when I first saw Sickle. And Sickle was huge. I know, I described her that way from our prior encounter. That time, however, it had been dark, lit only by a swinging pip-buck screen. It had left as much to my imagination as it had shown. This time, I saw her in the light of day, however overcast it might have been. She stood there without her armor, glaring out at us, and I realized that my imagination might have been lacking. She wasn't just big. She was easily the largest pony I'd ever seen. Now, admittedly, I have never seen any of the princesses with my own eyes, but that wouldn't have changed the statement. I'm reasonably certain that only Celestia would have stood taller, but even she wouldn't have come close to matching Sickle in size. The closest I could think of was some old stallion who had retired in Appaloosa, in his prime. He had stood nearly as tall as my queen, and was strongly built. Even then, I suspect Sickle surpassed him. She was large and she was thick, and she looked like the strongest pony ever. A bit of clarification. When I say that she looked like the strongest pony ever, I imagine it conjures up different images to different ponies. I'm still getting used to how perceptions have changed since the mega spells, but I know that during my stay in wartime Equestria, many ponies asked to picture an extremely strong pony would think of bodybuilders. They think of ponies with ultra-low body fat to highlight the contours of muscles, with focus exercises that led to big, bulky shoulders and narrow hips and legs. Personally, as something of a professional in the arts of body alteration and morphology, it's a look that always struck me as profoundly unnatural. Sickle, she didn't look like that. She didn't have some perfectly sculpted body, she just looked thick. Her hooves were the size of my head, her legs as thick as my chest, her body was strong and thick all the way through. Some might have looked at the soft definition and the roundness of her belly and concluded that she was just fat, but I knew well how fat distributes around a pony's body, and that wasn't what I saw on her. What I saw was a healthy bit of padding over an immense, powerful frame. She looked like she might have been more of a bear than a pony. The rest of her appearance was thoroughly rough and rugged. Her coat was a faded pink, wild and unkempt. It was also worn thin around her withers, hips, and a few other places. The lingering signs of heavy armor I had first seen her in, and her mane and tail, both in slightly darker shades of pink, were scraggly, thin, and short. And just for good measure, all of it was dirty and frayed, with the kind of worn-in grime that made me think that she didn't even understand the concept of bathing, much less had ever done so. Her neck was almost as thick around her head, and her face, well, she showed signs of wounds all across her body, but it was her neck and head that bore the most impressive. Old scars left her features jagged and uneven. The left side of her jaw was so scarred up that the fair section was bare skin. She was missing half of her right ear. Her muzzle was lumpy and ever so slightly askew, as if it had been broken multiple times in the past. Suffice to say, she wouldn't win any beauty competitions, saving by threatening to crush the judges. I also noted that she was an earth pony. Apparently the horn on her helmet hadn't been to protect the horn underneath. At least her cutie mark seemed relatively benign, a single large horseshoe. The whole powerful, rugged, chewed-up appearance combined to make the glare of pure death she was giving Dusty even more menacing. When she spoke, her voice was deep and rumbling.
What the fuck do you want, Dirt?
It's Dusty.
I know what your fucking name is,
she snapped, taking a step forward. Dusty took 2 steps back and covered the same distance.
I asked you, what?
She looked right at me. I could see now that she swayed slightly when she moved, as if off balance. Her eyes were dilated, with only a faint ring of blue barely visible, and I could see them trying to focus on me as she blinked. Then her expression hardened and my gut dropped.
You. I remember you, you little cunt. And you.
She looked at Starlight, slightly swaying with emotion.
I told you 2 bitches what I'd do to you if you ever showed your fucking face around here again.
Her head dropped, her legs tensed, and my heart started to pound at the inside of my chest.
What the fuck is this, Dirt?
It's a job offer, Dusty quickly answered, holding up his hooves.
That's it.
She looked square at him, blinking several more times as she refocused.
What the fuck would I want with a job?
No, not that kind of job, Dusty said. He was doing a good job to keep his voice calm and conversational without devolving into patronization. Given how hard my heart was beating and the copious amounts of adrenaline burning in my veins, I even might have had trouble remaining so level-headed. Memories of being held helpless under those giant hooves did not help. A job killing raiders. Sickle's ears, that is, ear and a half, perked up and her murderous glare vanished.
The fuck are you talking about?
I have a job. Problem is, there's a bunch of raiders where I need to do that job. Raiders got a nice bounty on them, and I'd figured that you'd kill all the raiders and collect their bounty, and we'd do our job and everyone makes an assload of caps. She stared at him for a couple seconds, blinking. Then she smiled. It was a cold smile, so predatory that I would have been only slightly surprised to see sharp teeth.
Go fuck yourself, Dirt.
Dusty took a half step back. It's a lot of caps, Sickle.
Yeah, right,
she growled, advancing a step and ducking her head to glare into Dusty's eyes.
You want me to kill a bunch of ponies for you? You're gonna have to give me a cut of whatever you're gonna get for this job.
We'll let you have all the bounties, Dusty said. That's a lot of caps.
Fuck you. I can kill any raider for a fucking bounty.
Her grin returned.
You want me to go out of my way to kill these raiders? Then you're gonna have to make it worth my while.
Dusty considered that a moment, doing his best to meet her glare without flinching away, though I could see the tension in his limbs. Fine. You get a share of the pay, and we all split the bounties.
No, I'm gonna be doing most of the killing. You little shits sure aren't.
She waved a giant dirty hoof towards Starlight and myself.
So, I get a full share, and all the bounties for the raiders you bring me along to kill, or you all can fuck off.
Dusty stared back at her, his brows furrowing. She met the look with a sneer that made her scarred face crinkle up in strange ways. After a moment of their silent stare-off, Dusty looked over to us. So, what you two think? Starlight grunted unintelligibly. I gave a slight more vocal reply.
If you think it's a good idea, I would accept that.
He sighed and looked back to Sickle. Okay, deal. Her chuckle rumbled so deeply I could practically feel it.
Alright, so, where are we going and when?
Some compound south of here, Dusty said, gesturing a hoof in that direction. About 40 miles, and I'd like to set out as soon as possible. Sickle nodded, and her eyes blinking several more times as she looked south.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Let me get my shit.
She turned around, staggering a little, and disappeared into the shack again, slamming the door behind her.
Charming,
Starlight said, and Dusty grunted in agreement. It was several minutes and quite a few thumps and bangs from the inside of the shack before the door opened again. Sickle stepped out to the clinging and scraping of metal, and she looked more like I remembered her from our first encounter, but the light gave me a much better view. I could tell now just how thick her armor was, and the only places I could see her coat were a few bits of her face and the tip of one ear. That thickness made the dents and dings even more impressive. Just to imagine how much force had been applied to it, the armor was as battle-worn as she was. There were also a set of metal boxes hanging at her sides like armored saddlebags. It looked as if someone had attached straps to a pair of large ammunition boxes, and then welded medical boxes to those. A few faded flecks of yellow still clung to the metal, despite the many scrapes, dents, and even crudely patched bullet holes. The thick barred muzzle hung from one side of her helm, the other clasp dangling free. She was chewing on something and her muzzle was wet and dripping. She'd apparently went to drink something and missed. She swallowed whatever it was that she was chewing, then shoved the muzzle into place over her snout, latching it in place.
"Okay, Dirt,"
she said, voice slightly muffled.
"Lead the way."
With a weary shake of his head, Dusty started walking. Much to my growing sense of dread, Sickle hung back right next to me. I tried to ignore how I could feel her hoofsteps through the earth. Then her huge armored head swung around in my direction, the spear-like horn looming dangerously in my direction as well. In the deep shadows of her helmet's eye slits, I saw tiny twin reflections of light.
"So, what's your name?"
My voice faltered slightly as I spoke.
"Whisper? Whimper. Got it."
Her head swung over towards Starlight.
"And you?"
Starlight looked back with an unrestrained, hateful glare.
"It's Starlight. Whatever."
Sickle shook her head. Her armor clanked noisily with emotion, and she stumbled a little.
"Both of you, listen good. When I threaten to do something to a pony, I follow through. Period."
I started considering escape routes before she even continued.
"The only reason I'm not stomping your fucking heads in is because I know Dirt dragged you out here. So, I'm letting you two bitches off with a techno-what's-it."
I was wary of speaking at all, but I cautiously replied.
"Thank you."
That head swung my way again, a sneer showing behind that muzzle.
"You want to thank me? You can stick your snout between my legs and show it. Otherwise, you can fuck off."
Her pace quickened to catch up with Dusty while I happily lagged behind, having no desire to stay too close to an angry Goliath of a mare. Hanging back also revealed that her armor, despite covering almost every inch of her, left her groin bare. I suppose it made sense, as it meant one wouldn't have to remove the armor to relieve themselves. Unfortunately, the observation combined unpleasantly with her prior statement. Starlight broke the following silence.
"I hate her."
I winced, even as Sickle let out a quiet chuckle. Somehow we managed to go through the rest of that long, intense day without incident. Little was said, even Starlight was quiet. She responded to my inquiries with little more than "I'm fine" before continuing on in silence. When she looked anywhere but where she was setting her hooves, it was over to our newest traveling companion. Unsurprisingly, Sickle was the focus of all my attention as well. Sickle didn't seem to think much of us most of the time. She rarely turned her attention away from where she was walking, and on a few occasions, she looked at one of us. I could just barely see the corner of her mouth quirk upwards in a smirk under that metal muzzle that she wore. At first, those looks were accompanied by a few moments of wavering and focusing, and even the occasional stumble. Those diminished as we traveled, and within a couple of hours, whatever impairment that she had inflicted upon herself, it had faded away. It was around then that I got an impression that those glances had changed. While I couldn't clearly see her eyes in the shadows that pooled behind those narrowly slits, the little glimpses I could catch suggested a sharp, focused look to my mind. The impaired look of amusement and contempt had been replaced with a more critical expression. I worried whether that was better or for worse. Dusty called to a halt as night fell, leading us to a narrow draw on a dry and dusty ridge, where a few dead trees and dry bushes gave a little bit of concealment. I was happy to slip off my saddlebags, and we began to unpack our sleeping gear. Sickle was the exception. She simply rolled to her side and collapsed with a tremendous crash of metal. She ended sprawling out, propping up against the stump of a dead tree with her legs splayed in either direction. If it were some other pony, I might have considered the pose silly or a simple expression of exhaustion. Sickle just made it look lewd. I hid my attention by busying my hooves while setting out my bedroll while observing her in the corner of my vision. After getting comfortable, Sickle reached up to undo one of the clasps of her muzzle, letting it swing free to hang open from the side of her helm. She dug awkwardly due to an angle rather than lack of coordination at her saddlebag cases with her hooves. Eventually, she retrieved a large bottle and some jerky. She pried the bottle cap off with her teeth, spinning it back into the case that she had retrieved the bottle from, and took several deep swallows from it. Then she bit off a large piece of jerky. She chewed for several seconds before her head lazily rolled to the side to stare at Starlight. She spoke while chewing, spraying a few little bits of half-chewed meat as she sneered.
You got a problem, little bitch?
She looked over at Starlight, and then I saw that she wore an irritated expression, though she quickly looked away from Sickle.
You're disgusting,
she said, keeping her glare focused on her own bags as she unpacked. Sickle gave a dry chuckle and followed up by gratuitously scratching an armored hoof at her crotch.
Yeah, and?
Starlight's ears pinned back up, her blanket freezing in midair. I quickly stepped in too.
Hey, Starlight, do you...
Sickle's hoof shot out, pointing straight at me. Even with plenty of distance between us, I flinched back.
Fuck off, Whimper,
she said with a sneer.
We're talking.
When she turned her look back to Starlight, the smaller unicorn met her with an unflinching glare.
I saw what you did at the depot.
Sickle's head tilted to the side as she continued to chew on the jerky for several seconds.
Uh-huh. What about the depot? That army depot,
Starlight clarified.
The one where you butchered all those ponies.
After a moment of more thinking, Sickle shrugged.
I don't know. That doesn't really narrow it down much, does it? What? You butchered that many ponies?
Starlight said, her voice rising.
It was a week ago. A warehouse in the middle of a desert with a bunch of... Oh, yeah!
Sickle said, breaking out in a big grin.
Hell, that was fun.
She took another bite of her jerky.
So, what about it? You got a problem with killing raiders?
Starlight recoiled a bit, but continued on.
I'm fine with killing raiders,
she said.
I'm not so fine with some ponies sticking their bodies on a pole like some sort of fucked up flag.
Despite the criticism, Sickle was chuckling.
Oh, so you saw what I did to Pike, huh? Yeah, she was a fun little bitch.
Her chuckles ended as she tilted her head, smirking at Starlight.
Guess you didn't see her cutie mark then. I know I left one of her hind legs laying around there.
Starlight glared for a couple seconds before replying through her clenched teeth.
There wasn't enough left of them to see it.
I paused in my unpacking, a packet of food in my hose, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to eat with a topic at hoof.
Too bad,
Sickle said with a rumbling chuckle.
You'd recognize it. I just gutted a pony's body on a spike. She liked to do that to ponies, so I thought it'd be all ironic like to do that to her.
She made a quick thrusting gesture with her hoof.
So, I stuck her own spear up her cunt and left her on display.
I grimaced. I placed the food back in my pack and closed it.
That's fucking disgusting,
Starlight said, trembling, which just made Sickle smile even more.
Yeah, and?
She gave a deep rumbling laugh, ending where she turned up her bottle and chugged the rest of its contents. She sent the bottle flying through the air to crash on the ground behind her, and continued.
Ain't like she was some fucking saint or some shit. She put up whole caravans like that just to show others what she did when they didn't pay her toll. Hell, sometimes she'd do it even if they could.
She sneered once more.
Bet you'd change your mind if you saw a whole bunch of little blank flank colts and fillies on display with poles jammed up their asses and out of their mouths, all because Ma and Pa didn't have enough caps.
I shuddered, unable to hold back a whimper at the vileness that she conjured up, which, naturally, appeared to amuse Sickle given the moniker that she had chosen for me. Even the horrors I had seen did little to take the sting out of what she described. I'd like to think that I avoid poetic license when possible, but I felt like it hurt something deep inside of me to hear such an atrocity spoken of so plainly. The many levels of wrongness required to reach this state were the sort of thing that could drive a thinking person to despair. Starlight's voice drew me out of my inward focus. She trembled, looking faintly queasy, but managed to fix Sickle with a glare once again.
I saw the colt that you killed. Huh?
Sickle said, helmet tilting again.
What colt? At the depot!
Starlight said, the trembling fading from her voice.
The one you kicked through it. Oh!
Sickle grinned in recognition.
I remember that little shit now. Yeah, that was a good one. I was thrashing the place and some pony charges me from behind, so I gave him a quick little kick, only to send the fucker flying straight through the wall, so of course, I gotta check it out just to see, what the fuck. Yeah, he was dead. One kick, but it gets even better. Ends up, this little fucker came at me with a knife. A tiny fucking knife.
She broke out laughing, thumping a hoof against the ground. When her laughter finally died down, Starlight spoke up again, though quietly.
It's still disgusting. Hey, yeah, kid was a raider. He deserved it. Aren't you a raider too?
Any hint of amusement Sickle had was gone in an instant. Even her chewing stopped. When she spoke, her voice was low and quiet.
I ain't a fucking raider, she said. Not anymore. Were a raider then.
Starlight clarified, despite the sudden change in tone that had set me on full alert. She didn't waver at all, and she met the monstrous mare's glare.
Does that mean you deserved it if I killed you?
Her bag still floated in her magic, but just behind her I noticed that her lancer was wrapped in the same magical glow, half obscured by her body. My heart hammered inside of my chest as I moved my shoulder forward. A quick twist would bring my rifle to where I could hold it. The question was whether I could possibly do so in time to matter. After a couple seconds of silence, a grin slowly spread across Sickle's scarred muzzle.
Yeah, I guess I would. What, you gonna try it?
Another stretch of silence. Finally, Starlight relaxed ever so slightly, the lancer sliding down, resting onto the ground behind her.
Not today. Then quit your bitching,
Sickle said, still grinning as she laid her head back against the tree. On the opposite side of our small little camp, Dusty resumed laying out on his own bedding. I sat next to Starlight as she finished unpacking. She grumbled a little, and I tried to be comforting just by being there. I couldn't think of anything useful to say, at least not with Sickle lying right there. Her bad mood faded a bit as she ate, and after a while I was even able to stomach a bit of food, and shared one of the snack cakes that I had stashed away during our celebratory dinner. By the time we were done eating, she gave me a weak but appreciative smile. Meanwhile, Sickle ate a bit, drained and tossed another bottle, and downed a couple of pills. After latching her muzzle back into place, she settled into her sleep. By the time we were done eating and ready to sleep, her head was lolled to the side, drooling as she snored. While Dusty sat vigilant to take the first watch, Starlight and I tucked into our simple beds. Minutes later, when I had drifted off to sleep, I heard the quiet whisper, barely audible.
Whisper?
I cracked open an eye to see her, lying on her side and looking at me, worry etched into her expression.
Yeah?
She swallowed, eyes wandering before returning to me.
I'm not really comfortable where this is going. Yeah, me neither.
She gave a ghost of a smile, as if appreciating that I felt the same way, but it faded as quick as it came.
Do you think that she's gonna cause a problem?
I had to consider that. There was so much that I didn't know, and Sickle was throwing in all new complications. Despite that, after a moment of thinking, I answered honestly.
No, I think she's just having fun riling us up. I don't think she'll cause any real problems, and if things do take a turn for the worse, we'll get out of it together.
I smiled gently and comfortingly, and she eventually did as well.
Thanks, Whisper.
I gave a tiny nod as she tucked her blanket in around her, her eyes closing. I settled into sleep once more. We still had a long couple of days ahead of us.